Is this, yeah. Okay, it's always a relief moment on any talk on comics, because if the PowerPoint doesn't come up, then you're describing comics half the time. So ice and snow are red hot favorites, and first of all, apologies, there are going to be some really bad jokes in this, but you know, it's different time zones. Ice and snow are red hot favorites in popular visual culture, and I'm sure, and you're all about to sing along of the one that we all know, and I think we're going to hear more about later from 2013 is Frozen. More of this. But just to say that the visual culture to do with ice tends to be multi-layered, like snow and ice itself, in that Frozen is, as of course I'm sure you know, based on Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, which in turn has had various versions, one of which was the Scottish ballet Snow Queen, which is absolutely incredible. So to say that these cultural references are very much palimpsestic, that they build up and interact with each other, which is part of the very nature of the phenomenon we're looking at, the way you build up and you build different creations from single masses. This remains, of course, popular, whereas, and it's also an example of the mixing of high and low culture. Is Scottish ballet high culture or low culture? What about Frozen? But it's the type of mixing which we're not, it's enough to chill Pierre Bourdieu. Likewise, A Winter's Tale by a certain William Shakespeare, which for most people will be classed as high culture, has had various popular adaptations which then take us onto different dimensions. Back to Disney. One of today's favorite manifestations of the art of Disney is the Disney on Ice show. And I've never seen, I've always wanted to see this. It's whereupon the audience feels the chill. So an important point of such a show is that it is linked to an ice rink, and that it's not just what you see and what you hear, but in this case, it's the temperature and the ambient atmosphere, which then becomes three-dimensional. One of the best examples of this three-dimensionality in popular culture and snow and ice is something called Slava's Snowshow. Do you know this? It was something I discovered reasonably recently.
May I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go on.
You encouraged us, so I hope that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
We will actually tomorrow have a roundtable discussion where one of the performers will talk about this.
Absolutely brilliant.
Dr. Ira Seidenstein, who was one of the clown performers, comic performers in the show. So we haven't talked about this yet, but we will tomorrow. So that's like you are kind of introducing that to us now.
It's brilliant. Well, what I hope to show then is a very quick clip of the type of, here we go. Can you all see it okay?
Yeah.
So as you can see from this clip, it's a show that very much involves the audience, whereby popular culture isn't just a one-way thing, it's a two-way thing. And that the audience is part of the show, the snow falls on the audience get the ice blasts. So it's taking this popular culture, which is initially visual, then into more than just the two-dimensional. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow to see more about this. I was lucky enough to see this, and excuse the pun, it's absolutely blown away. Very, very imaginative. In these markers, ice and snow defines the image, the atmosphere, and this is often to be anchored, to use Roland Barthes' terms. And these are just a couple of references that I've put in my handout, but I'm sure you're aware of this. So it's using the specifics of the text to anchor the generality of the image being snow. So the story of Elsa might be the general anchor that is then applied to the text that is around that of the snow and the atmosphere of the chilled north. It creates a narrative through word and image interaction, and in some cases, the interaction takes it into the three-dimensional, as in the case of Slava. So today, what I hope to do is to give you no more than a real whirlwind snowstorm. You probably know that there are lots of comics that involve snow and ice villains, and we're going to see some more about that later. That there are heroes from both DC and Marvel, which are very mainstream. I'm not going to concentrate on these too much because I think that you probably would get better experts on them than me. What I'm going to do is try and give a very quick overview of some of the background to snow comics, so the historic angle, and then hopefully have a quick look at two which have grabbed my imagination: Période, glaciaire and La Caverne du Pont, two 21st century snow comics, bande dessinée, and see what they're doing and how that all fits in before the general conclusion of why is it that ice and comics seem to fit so well together. Any questions on this and the setup and how, before I delve back into the history? Okay, so early snow comics then. Although there were no comics in the Ice Age, quite obviously, but I will come back to the Ice Age, visual narratives span human time. And what we might call proto-comics, that is to say, visual narratives doing essentially what comics do way before the modern comic was invented, whenever that was. Proto-narratives exist from prehistory through the ancients and more recently into the Middle Ages. So this is just one example, is descriptive scenes that can be seen as telling a story. This is from Pieter Bruegel's Winter Landscape with Ice Skaters and Bird Trap from 1565. Here I reminisce because at school we were given this a copy of this painting, obviously a copy of the originals in Brussels, and told to make up the stories that go with it. Who are the characters? What are they doing? What happened to them before? What happened to them afterwards? And it's one of the ways of realizing that even in a single frame image, you can very much have a story, and the story is based on events and characters in general. In this particular example, one of the main characters is the snow and ice itself. And here, and in some of the other examples I'll be giving, the snow and the ice is a faceless baddie. And again, we'll be hearing more, I believe, later about baddies with faces. But in this case, the snow and the ice is a faceless baddie that fulfills the needs of a superhero opposition whilst remaining white and not black in terms of traditional binary, thus providing a nemesis without malevolence, nemesis without nastiness. So snow is this ambiguous topos, which can be good and bad. It's threatening but comforting, which in terms of superhero narratives can be a bit confusing, but also insightful. In the early modern period, emblem books, and this is my own personal background, mixed text and image, often with an implied narrative. So in this case, it's from 1540, it's from Gilles, and it's to give you an example of what an emblem is. We look at the front image and we see this squirrel and we think, what on earth is the squirrel doing? Is it to do with it being on water? Is it to do with it being on a raft? The text at the top says, cédez de tous ses membres. So to help yourself to get by using all of your facilities. And then, so you put the text and the image together, and it's the interaction of text and image that then creates a message, which says, quand tes affaires tu remembres, qui tombent en adversité, il te a donc nécessité de te servir de tous tes membres. So basically, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. get by whichever way you can. And here the squirrel is drifting down the river and it uses its tail as a sail. Often comics will do the same thing. They're not illustrated books, they're interactions of text and image. Now at this point, you're probably wondering why Billy, or whoever he's called, is giving us a squirrel. That's absolutely nothing to do with the theme today. Well, it's one that caught my imagination. I thought, I've often wondered, did they take this? Would they possibly have known Gilles Corroset's 1540 emblem? Another emblem book is Geoffrey Whitney's book of 1586. And again, the narrative is once again with Geoffrey Whitney. It is the narrative of life's dangers and decay, which are often associated with ice. So in this particular example, we see the story of a fox that takes refuge on ice, only to find that it melts and he remains adrift. So the motto from this, Nolus dolus contra causum, cunning is nothing against chance. So ice, just as ice melts and you can never expect it, you can never expect what fate is going to give to you. And no matter how clever you can be, sometimes you can find yourself drifting away an iceberg. Moving forward, the world's first modern comic, and that's what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to it. Why am I saying that? Because it came from Glasgow. The world's first modern comic was the Glasgow Looking Glass, and this is a facsimile from 1825. Modern comic in the sense that it is mass produced. So if we can say that the first modern comic has to be something which is produced by the mass printing of the 19th century, by lithography, and which can then be taken away, folded, put in, undiscarded, although real comics geeks would never discard a comic. Within the pages of the world's first modern comic, then, we see this reference immediately to Duddingston Lock and the story that once again unfolds here. But once again, we have this interplay between what might be classed as high culture and low culture via the reference to the Raeburn famous portrait of the Reverend skating on the ice. So the full title of that is the ice skating minister at Duddingston. All of this, once again, the oppositions here are the oppositions of comics, the opposition of good, the implication that a minister is good, but the minister is in black, that the ice is in white, but the ice is bad. But the ice in this case is allowing him to enjoy himself, but should he, as a member of the Church of Scotland, be enjoying himself? So once again, it's comics setting up oppositions which often can use the theme of ice and snow to do that so strikingly. Nearer to what we get as what we now feel as being comics, and sometimes it is just a question of that's a comic because I reckon it's a comic, are Winsor McKay's Slumberland fantasies and the Dream World of Little Nemo, which were produced between 1905 to 1911, originally came out in newspaper supplements. The Snowstorm, which reminds me of Slava's Snowstorm, and notably a Snow King in his realm, an iconographic precursor, in my view, to Frozen and the Snow Queen, as it was to Switch. These examples are, of course, but the tip of the iceberg, but I hope they serve to show that ice and snow is a theme that is present throughout the development of comic narratives, text image, picture stories, providing oppositions and environments with timeless resonances. So now I'd like to just pick out two contemporary examples. Any questions so far on this? Is it making... Okay, so I'll get my skates on. Let's look specifically at Période glaciaire, which I'm using the English translation. I thought that was probably easier. And there isn't an English translation, although it's a bilingual volume, La Caverne du Pont de l'Arc. So how many of you have heard of either of these, just out of interest? I wasn't really expecting you to have, but anyway, okay. Well, let's start. Période glaciaire is from 2005. Glacial Period in English, by Nicolas de Crécy, and La Caverne du Pont de l'Arc is of 2015 by Marc, Azéma and Gilles Tosello. In Glacial Period, de Crécy creates a futuristic rediscovery of the Louvre and its masterpieces after it has been buried in a fictive, icy Période glaciaire. The soft pastel colours contrast with the predominance of white, with the notion, however, as the art as being everlasting. So to a certain extent, the contrasts are brought out by the contrast in style, the contrast between realism and this imagined dystopia, maybe? Is the Ice Age a dystopia or a utopia? To which are to be contrasted men and animals who, unlike the works of art, are transitory. Nonetheless, even the everlasting is transformed by the ravages of time, symbolized here by the new glacial period, with the concluding scene being marked by nothingness. In this series, which was commissioned by the Louvre, fiction and metafiction intertwingle, imagination and lived reality in a microcosm of the snowstorm that is life itself. It's a really interesting book, and I'd say if you can get hold of it, it's one that gets you thinking. La Caverne du Pont de l'Arc is a slightly different view on ice. It imagines the struggles of the original protagonists around the Pont de l'Arc, the prehistoric cave that is in the Ardèche region of France. The snow is a historic and anthropological necessity, but also, again, a representative of humankind's eternal struggle. It's a book that takes comic strips into the realm of science, and so that's why I chose this one, because as with this conference series, we see arts and sciences, anthropology and art history intertwining. Well, this is exactly what this book does. It comes from a background of archaeology and anthropology, but produces a work of art, a comic strip, in order to express the questions and ideas wherein. So it gives examples, for instance, in this case, of the current day Pont de l'Arc, of prehistoric artwork and their place in society. It ends up with a considerable post face, giving some of the historic and scientific details, allowing references that intermingle art, history, prehistory, anthropology, and it comes with related, exhibitions, festivals, and indeed the forthcoming Rencontre archéologique de Narbonne festival. I'll just see if I've got the, no, I thought I had a different. So, two bande dessinées which do very different things, which take comics in new directions beyond superhero stories, whilst mixing genres and forms. So it's time now for me to conclude. Why ice? Well, as I've said, you can find all sorts of mainstream DC Marvel comics, comic characters that incorporate the theme of ice, and these are just some of them. And on the handout, there's a reference to a few online articles that are really helpful. Why is this topic so suited to comics? On the one level, as I've suggested, it provides an opposition, often so necessary for oppositional narratives, obviously, but one which allows for assimilation. It's the paradox of a friendly enemy. More specifically, we can note the eternal nature of storytelling and of snow. Both have always been with humankind. Both of these forms boast intrinsically hybrid and changing natures, comics are hybrid. They're a mixture of text and image. Comics evolve as they evolve from early sketches into printed works and now increasingly online. And I think one of the definitions of snow is it's a transformation of material from water, from liquid to solid forms. Perhaps above all, both comics and snow give the ability to express non-visual emotions visually. The blast of an icy heart, or the Petrarchan contrast of the defrosting of love. And I think that's what's happening in the Slava snow shows, this idea of the defrosting of love. We see ice as showing an emotion which can be, if associated with love, can be standoffishness that needs to be thawed. And so it's a way of expressing our inner feeling through an outer visual concept, which is difficult to do in any human realm. I'm going to finish on a personal note, however, and part of that afterwards explaining you why I called Billy. Indeed, my current project is on the collapse of the canon, and it includes a notion of personal journey criticism. It's the idea that scholarship and artistic creation is inevitably linked to personal experience. In the positive age of the 19th century, we were told that we had to be empirical. Gustave Lanson would say that the great books are chosen because they're intrinsically great. I'd like to suggest the obvious in that that's not true. The reason we choose great books and we create canons is because of what we've come across in our own personal life. Many of us have grown up with comics, maybe all of us, and even if you're from Australia, we all know snow. All the references I've given you today have a personal link. And it's not just, I think, being narcissistically self-indulgent. I think it's being honest about something that we all do. We talk about what we know. And it was great that the last question was, why did you pick snow, ice? And the answer was, because I like it. Well, that's exactly the same answer for me. I haven't got time to explain all the personal references in the pictures I've shown you today, but they're all there. And in my case, and maybe in some of your cases, it is basically who I am, comics and snow. So I would go away with that. Comics and snow, for many people, it's who we are. Okay.